preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words in the heart. And we had two young people that were brand new Christians in high school, and they ended up coming to Alabama. And I made a few calls before they came up here. One of them is still here, Jacob Aiken. I don't think he's in town though right now, unfortunately. But you guys instantly connected with them and his family and him. And I want to say thank you for that. And also, we have a lot of kids from Madison that are a part of the college ministry here. And so I want to say thank you to you guys. Thank you to Randy and what you guys are doing. I know it's such a regular thing, but I want you to know from somebody from the outside how much it's appreciated. That what you are doing here for the college students and the community that is here is making a big difference. And our kids love it so much. And so, again, just want to say thank you, and we really appreciate what you guys are doing. So, over the past few months, and one of my kids is here so he can attest to this, our kids have really, really wanted a dog. And the problem for them wanting a dog is we right now have in our home a no pet policy. Now, I know that sounds like you're not being a good parent, Andrew, because pets can teach kids responsibility. And I do agree, by the way. But for us, the reason why we don't want a dog right now has a lot to do with several things. We might say life stage. One of the other reasons why, I'll go ahead and tell you, is money. We have no family that lives near us. And if y'all know what I'm talking about, every time you go out of town, because the dogs we've had prior, you go to take that dog to the vet, and it's not just, they'll tell you over the phone, it's like $15 a night. But then you go and you get there and they're like, you got to get this shot and this and this and this. And even if you're gone for 2 days, you're dropping minimum $300 on that dog. And so every time we were going out of town, we were spending $300. So we're like, well, we don't want to do that. But really more than anything, the dogs that we have had, I have poured so much money, energy, and effort into them. And that love was never reciprocated, okay? And so I'll go back to my middle school days. We had been asking all of elementary school to get a dog. And Dad saying, we don't want a dog. I don't want a dog. We don't have someone to watch the dog. And so we begged and we begged. And so he said, all right, I'll get you a dog. And so what I thought when he was going to get us a dog, I was picturing something manly, like a German Shepherd, a Lab, a Rottweiler, a Husky, something like that is what I had in mind. This is what Dad brought home. This is called a Lhasa Apso. And if you did not know this, these dogs, turns out, come in male. So they can be males. And so we got one of these dogs, and it was a male. And Dad said, since I know this is not what you had in mind, my sister was ecstatic. She was like putting bows in this male dog's hair. That was how she treated it as a little kid. And she said, Dad said, you can name it. And so I named it Baxter. And so this doesn't look like a Baxter, but that's who we had. And the thing about Baxter that was kind of exhausting is every single time we sat down for a meal or we went to sit down in the living room, that was the only time he went and scratched at the door and barked. Every time. He was waiting for us to get comfortable to then make us move. And so we would sit down to eat, and he would start scratching at the door, go, over and over. Okay. And so we did that it was only when we were sitting down. And so we got tired of that, and what we decided to do was to get a buddy of ours to come to our house, get his circular saw, and to put a rectangle in that back door, to cut a hole in that thing, and to put something that's called a doggy door. And so we put that doggy door there, and we spent the money on getting this guy here. We spent the money on the doggy door. We got Baxter. We put him in front of it. We're like, all right, go. And he just stood there. Well, okay, we know it's new. And so what I did is I got the door, and you know how when you push it makes that sound, the little flapping sound? When it did, and he heard the flapping, he starts shaking and is scared of the flapping noise. And so, oh great, we just spent all this money, put a hole in the door, and the dog doesn't even want to go out it and is scared of the flapping noise. And so he didn't want to go out it. And so when we were sit at the table,
what he would do is he would go to the right or the left of the doggy door, scratching and barking every time we were seated to say, hey, would you let me out? Well, what ended up happening was my mom said, well, Andrew, maybe he just doesn't get what it looks like. So could you get down on all fours and crawl in and out the doggy door to show Baxter how to do it? You're like, man, you must have been, I was a late bloomer. So I was able to crawl in and out of that. And the whole time Baxter was like, what is wrong with these people? You know, this guy's crawling in, and he didn't want to go out that door. Finally, what it took was we had to put a treat on the other side. And he hopped over, got the treat, and he was like, oh, you know, this is great out here. And finally he learned to use it. Well, then when he learned to use it, he found a girlfriend. And so he started going outside whenever he wanted to, but he was scratching under our fence, leaving, going to different places. And I remember it was either me or my dad that was running up and down the street chasing that guy, okay? Well, fast forward, when Lorianne and I got married, we had been married for about a year, and she was like, Andrew, I either want like a dog or a baby. And I was like, well, those are two different things. And so why don't we start seeing first if we can raise an animal and keep it alive first. And so we got, you know, started looking for dogs. And again, I had in my mind a very manly dog. Well, this is what she picked out. A Yorkshire Terrier, okay? Yorkie. Turns out these come in male too, and we got one, and his name was Carson. Carson was a great dog, but the problem with Carson is when we had, with Cruz, he was okay, but then when we brought child number 2 and then child 3 home, he did not like it. He started using the bathroom in the house. He started climbing up on the table while we were eating our food. He was awful all of a sudden when we got kids. And then whenever the door opened, he never did this before, would dart. And so when he would go missing, my wife and my kids like, put posters out, do that kind of thing. Okay. And then I got on What's Happening in Robertsdale. If you've seen this dog, please contact this number. And one person said, what's her name? And I said, well, Carson. And the guy said, underneath being funny, more like Catherine. And I get it. But anyway, so then the dog goes, we finally get him back. The dog goes missing again. And I was like, I'm not running after him. I'm done chasing this dog. And then my kids are crying. They're like, go get him. I'm like, okay. And so I'm like, I'll look out the window, and sure enough, I see him. And I'm in my jammies and no shoes, and I just start chasing this dog. And we live right near the Baldwin Beach Express in Robertsdale. Traffic, people are wondering what is going on. This man is chasing a Yorkie towards Buc-ee's, And so anyway, that's my experience with dogs. I poured so much money, I poured so much energy and effort into them, yet they did not reciprocate it. Did you know there's a term for this? It's called a groupie. And at every stage of life, some of you have had this. And a groupie is when you give inordinate amount of love to somebody that does not give it back. Some of you, back in the days of maybe the Beatles, you remember there was groupies. Some of you that may laugh at kids now, some of you said, I love you, Donnie. And I know what I'm talking about. Our generation, there was girls that said, I'm going to marry you, JT. But they married Bill from accounting. So what happened was there was this idea that I'm going to love this person. But what happened is they didn't love me back. The reason why I say all this is we get into this text today. That's what we're going to see in the book of Hosea. Y'all, this is a jaw-dropping story. And I'll never forget that I grew up hearing that there was a prophet named Hosea. But it wasn't until a college class at Faulkner in Minor Prophets that we're reading this, and I'm like, wait, what? That's in the Bible? It's a story of amazing love, but the costly nature of God's love. And if there's ever a text that you have ever wondered, could God love somebody, and would God want to care for somebody, and would God still want somebody like me after what He knows that I've done, and what after I know He knows that I've done, and where I've been? This is the narrative for you. It's a powerful story of God's love, but I want to kind of give you a little bit of the setting of it so we can really appreciate it. What happened in Hosea's day, they were being ruled by one of the worst kings ever, Jeroboam II. And the problem with Jeroboam, not only was he a terrible king, he was also allowing spiritual decline. He was allowing idols into their land. And so God kept coming to them saying, listen, why are you allowing these idols? I'm the one that's providing for you. I'm the one that's rescued you, but yet you keep bringing one after another in and you're worshiping them. And then also what's going on is they're in a time of distress because there's a mighty group of people named the Assyrians. They're knocking at the door and they're getting ready to attack. So they've got problems in the camp. They've got problems outside of the camp. And here's what they do, is what is easy for all of us to do. When problems arise, we have a choice. We turn to something. Every single human being in a time of distress turns to something. And it's either going to be an uppercase G, God, or it's going to be a lowercase G, God. We all turn to something. And so what they did is they turned to these idols. And so what God is going to do, He's going to use Hosea as a sermon illustration for the Central Church of Christ in 2025 to show you a picture of His love. And this is where it starts. It says, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go marry a promiscuous woman. Some of your translations say a prostitute. Oh, and by the way, I want you to have children with her. This is His first ministry assignment. Like I think back to when I was a intern at the University Church of Christ for the campus ministry. My first assignment was to plan a lock-in. That's His assignment. And you have to think that He's probably thinking, well, could I get something like Jeremiah? Could I get something maybe like Isaiah? Isaiah got to see the train of his robe fill the temple, and they had that angel came and touched his lips with the coal, and he says, here am I, send me. And this is what you're asking me to do? And then notice what it says. The reason why is because like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. What He's saying is, Hosea, I hate to break it to you, buddy, but you're going to be a real-life sermon illustration to show a picture of my love for a group of people that do not give it back. A group of people that I've poured so much into, yet they choose to run after other things. So Hosea is faithful to what God calls him to do. But notice, I want you to notice in this text what he uses as the point of tension. And it's this word, adultery. Unfortunately, probably a lot of you have experienced in your own families, and maybe you know people that have been gripped by the pain of adultery. There is nothing at times more painful, more difficult to have to navigate than that. And adultery is when you give to someone what you should be giving to your spouse. But what he does in this text, God uses the example of adultery to talk about what we do, which is spiritual adultery, where we give to someone, something else, what you and I should be giving to Jehovah, what we should be giving to God. And so notice here with Hosea, it says he went and he took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. So notice, he's not going through the motions here. He marries her, he has a kid, and it turns out, if you keep reading, he doesn't have just one kid, he doesn't have just two kids, they have 3 kids together. The morning alarm comes on, and he rolls over to turn it off. He looks over the next morning, and guess what? Gomer's missing. And by the language in the text, some people believe that she was already living at times, maybe at that time, in adultery because of the way it's worded here. But other things that, because it says she was conceived in grace, but there's different thoughts here. But it doesn't matter. He rolls over after the alarm goes off, and she's not there. And it says this in Hosea 2:5, their mother has been unfaithful and conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my drink, and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. What he's doing, he's saying exactly what Gomer is doing is what Israel has been doing. They've been saying, hey, this king or this group of people are going to give me what I want, so I'm going to go after just the next neat thing. And notice what he says next. He says, but she has not acknowledged I was the one that gave her the grain, the new wine, the oil, who lavished on her the silver and the gold, which they used for Baal. He's basically saying, the very things that you're running after is the very thing that I've been giving you. I'm providing for you. I'm giving you every single thing that you need. Do you know what this makes me think of? The Garden of Eden. Do you remember when God gave them that awesome place to live? They were in such fellowship with Him. Y'all, they were in such fellowship that when they were hiding, the Bible says that they heard God walking. Y'all, there's a lot of stuff walking in that garden. There was lions and tigers and bears. How did they know that was the steps of God? I'm telling you how, because they were walking with Him. Like, that's how close they were. But then what happened was they did what the Bible says is exchanging truth for a lie. They worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator. And so that's what's happening here with Gomer. But wouldn't you say that's what happens to us? Do you think that at times we are guilty of making that exact same trade? It's not an idol a lot of times in gold form, but a lot of times we might put a relationship on that pedestal. He's like, listen, I am the relationship you need. Do you remember the woman at the well? 5 husbands, and the guy she was with at the time was not her husband. You know what's interesting about that? That the number 6, which she had been having relationships with, represents incomplete. The number 7 means complete. That 7th relationship, when he shows up at the well as him, he's like, I'm the one that you're looking for. So just like Gomer, we're very guilty at times of running after other things when God is the one that's already providing for us. See, it's easy to fall into that same lie, to think that what we don't have is better than what we have, and what we don't have is what we really need to have to be happy. So I want to ask you a question that might be an odd question, but I mentioned at the beginning, is when you go through a difficult time, or maybe there's pressure in your life, where do you turn when things are difficult? When you're in a time of discouragement, when you're in a time of doubt? Because I'm telling you, what you choose to do instantly next during that disappointment is going to make all the difference in the world. I'll give you an example. I read a book, and I love I spent time in college ministry and loved it so much. And David Kinnaman and Barna Research have done a lot on 18 to 25-year-olds. And one of the things that they gathered is that during times of discouragement, times of disappointment, this is 18 to 30-year-olds, these are the top 3 things that happen when disappointment, discouragement happens. Either we'll say this, there must be no God, right? When things get difficult, well, if X plus Z or Y happens and Z is the answer, that there must not be a God. Number 2, one of the things that is said is they have isolated their questions that they have from their faith. And so that then raises to me the question, are we as a church a safe place for young people or all people to be able to ask questions? Because, by the way, there's 2 different types of doubt, and I'm not encouraging doubt. There is a healthy form of discouragement or doubt where you say, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't get it. I'm curious about some stuff, but I'm open to an answer. Unhealthy doubt, and here's where I want you to be careful, is saying, well, I don't know why this happened, and then you're not open to answers. Does that make sense? Like, there's a difference between the 2 of those. And so I want to encourage you with the fact that there's a book called Lamentations. There's a book called Psalms. 2 times we can see in Scripture where people very plainly shared with Jesus their doubts. And he said, hey, you can bring that to him. What I'm saying is your faith is not, our faith should be strong enough to bring those tough questions to. But the other thing is this, when difficult times happen, the third thing was this, that some press deeper into faith. That even though the pain was difficult, the pain was real, they noticed that God's love was deeper in that. And so this is what it says. So therefore, so she's left. Behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her a vineyard and make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Now, when you read Valley of Achor, that is a very important place in biblical history. If you go back to the book of Joshua, do y'all remember when God's people had an amazing victory against Jericho? Like, they should not have won that. Like, if you're looking at it from the scale of numbers and power, but they had the power of God on their side. They marched around that city, and what happened? Those walls came tumbling down, and when it did, God was very specific. As you go in, do not take any of the good things, the loot, we might call it today swag, for yourself. Leave that in there. Do not touch it, because I'm going to give you what you need. Everybody followed that except for one guy, a man named Achan. Achan went in there and he took some stuff for himself. He's like, hey, no one will notice. Because he bought into that same lie that what I don't have is what I really need to have in order to be happy. That he was looking towards something or someone else other than God, and he keeps it for himself. Well, guess what happens? Just like we know in the church, just like we know in a family, when one person sins, does it just impact that one person? No, it impacts the whole family. And so what then happens? Sin then enters the camp. They realize it's Achan. You know what they do? They stone the guy. And the Bible says this in Joshua 7, 24 through 26, that when they stoned him, the stones are actually still there from where they stoned him. You know what they called that place? The Valley of Achor, which means the Valley of Trouble. You see the similarities between the two of them. What happened in the Valley of Achor with Gomer running after something else is exactly what's happening with Achan. They both believed that lie, that what they were missing was way better than what they had. And so I want us to think about what maybe gets us in valleys. Now, this is not a scientific list. This is just and I did pick eyes because I did have to work with one for a second just to make it easy to follow. But I'll tell you one of the things I've noticed is what I'll call a state of indifference. And I've had people before that I haven't seen in a long time. I know they're struggling in faith, and I'll say, hey, can we get breakfast? Can we get lunch or something? And I'll talk to them, and I'll say, hey, what's going on? And they'll tell me, and I was like, well, hey, come back, or man, you don't need to be doing that. And they're like, I don't care. I just want to do it. And I'm like, no, you got to stop doing that. Like, I don't want to. And I'm like, I want it for you, but you can't want something enough for somebody, and you can't make them want it. And I'm like, well, do different, but I can't do that for them. That they're in just this state of indifference. Sometimes it's isolation. What they do is, because of maybe something difficult that happened, do you know what they do? They just go off by themselves. And by the way, when you do go through a difficult time, you do need some of your own time to rest, to get away. But I talked with one of our counselors at church a few weeks ago about this, and one of the things that she brought up is she said, one of the most important things if you're in a time of discouragement is to serve, to get involved. And it makes sense, by the way, because even though this is not a extrovert-introvert thing. How you do community as an introvert and extrovert is going to be different, and let me tell you this, that's okay. But at the same time, you and I were created in the image of community, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, to live in community for the glory of His community. We weren't made to be isolated. Maybe it's insecurities. Insecurity is that voice in your head that says, I'm not blank enough. I'm not talented enough. I don't know enough. And I'll go ahead and tell you, I remember a buddy of mine that's working in prison ministry in Montgomery. He said that when he was sitting around the table with some of the prisoners, he said, I didn't know what to say, as a conversation starter, because I'm living a totally different life than them. And he said, I thought. And he said, so I didn't know what to ask. And I was like, so how long have y'all been in here? He's like, what are you thinking? What a terrible thing to ask. And he said, they went around the table and started sharing. And then one of the guys said he was going to get out next month. And this guy said he's going to get out in like 6 months. And then he followed this up with, and he said, I also thought this was a dumb question. I said, well, are you guys excited? And he's like, well, of course they're excited. Here was their answer. No. And here's what they said. I've been in here before. I have a feeling I'll probably be in here again. And this is what one man said. I just don't think I have what it takes. It's that insecurity, that voice in your head that we all say, I'm not blank enough, I'm not talented enough, I don't know enough. Maybe for some of us, it's ingratitude that gets us in the valleys. That our eyes tend to be led into the things that we don't have, maybe kind of like what got, I guess, Gomer into where she was. Or maybe it's an idol, that we look to something or someone to give us what only God should give. And what we do is we let other things occupy our hearts and to have the place that only God should have. And in that place, I'll tell you what's going to happen is while you're in that valley, you're going to say things like this, well, God would never want to hear from somebody like me. He would never want a relationship with me after what I did. Or you might say this, well, I guess I just need to handle this myself. Or how about this? When I do better, then I'll come to him. You know about that one, by the way? There's a whole book called Romans that answers that very thing. And y'all know in John 8, and I know there's debate whether it's in the original canon or not, but when that woman was caught in the act of adultery, and when Jesus went up to her, and he said, hey, if you were without sin, go ahead and throw a stone. They dropped the stones, and he said, hey, where are your accusers? You know what he said to her, right? He said, if you go on your way and you stop sinning, then I won't condemn you. Isn't that what he said? No, he said, neither do I condemn you. Now go on your way and sin no more. We need to know, that's why in Romans 8:1, that in Jesus Christ there is no condemnation. He said, you are not condemned. Now go and sin no more. So he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make that place, that valley of trouble, I'm going to turn it into a door of hope. And here's what she's going to do. She's going to respond just like she did in the days of her youth. You know what he's saying? Is you just ran off. For Israel, they're running to other gods. Gomer's running to other men. What I'm going to do is the innocence that you thought was long gone, I'm telling you, I can actually restore that. What? Like the days of your youth, that I can make that place of trouble a door of hope. So we see very clearly, right, who we are in that valley, but who is God? Well, look what he does here. It says, go again. Love this woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress. If you look in Leviticus 20, because of what Gomer did, Leviticus 20 says she can be stoned, and he has every right in the world to divorce her. That's what the law says. God here is not looking for a loophole. And that's the thing about love. Love always looks beyond loopholes. Love drew him and got him to go beyond the legal requirement to pursue her. He says, so go again. And keep in mind this, because I keep having to remind myself, this is a real man that's living a real story. Think about, especially during this day, the kind of streets this man would have to walk through and walk down in order to go find her. He was walking in places and walking down streets that no self-respecting leader, especially, right, a prophet, would walk down. But that's what love does. But I think we all understand this on some level. Because let me ask you this. If your kid is in trouble somewhere out there, and you're not within walking distance, what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever it takes. I remember one of our kids spiked a fever, and it was like 102 at first. And we were new parents, so everything was extra big deal. You know, it's kind of like, when as the children come, like the first time the passy drops, you sterilize it. The second kid, you wipe it off. Third one, just put it in their mouth. Anyway, we were very nervous about the fever. It was 102. Well, then we took it like an hour later, and it got to 104. And that's dangerous. And so we hopped in the car, and my wife stays in the back seat with him and holding him. And then when she took it again, it was 104.2. We're like, oh no, this thing is rising and rising quick. So what I did is I went to this local Doc in the Box, and I went to the door, and I knew I had about 10 minutes left before they closed, and I opened the door, and it was locked. But they were in there. And there's the lady, behind the little glass thing where she sits there, and she's a receptionist, and I'm pulling on the door, and she's doing like she doesn't see me. I'm like, I know you see me. And she's, typing like this. And so I pull again, and I was like, hey. And she finally makes contact with me, and she's like, we're closed. I'm like, no, you're not. You got 10 minutes left, But she did not open that door. And so I went back in the car, and I said, hey, buddy, I'm sorry, just going to have to deal with it. Right? No. Why? Because that's my son. I drove 45 minutes to a whole nother hospital And I got there and I said, hey, listen, this is his temperature. You know what they started doing? They started washing him down. They started putting some water on him. They started cooling him down, giving him some medicines, getting him better. Why? Because that's what we do for our kids. And just to think about for a second, that when you think about when the Bible says, if you and I, who are good fathers, know how to give good gifts, then how much more does your Heavenly Father, who is perfect, know how to give good gifts? That's His goodness. And so I love how it says this, well, how could I give you up? How can I let you go? My compassion overflows. You know, when I was thinking about this text, this in Luke 15 popped into my mind. And, you know, when a human goes missing, we get chasing after a human, right? The prodigal son. Or caring that they're gone. If a sheep, an animal, a Yorkie, a Lhasa Apso goes missing, we get looking for that. But a coin? And see, that's what I thought of when I thought about this text. I was like, yeah, God, I get you chasing after that guy because he's doing really good, or he could be used. But her? Like, she was already in adultery, and now she's pursuing someone else, not even appreciating what you have, but yet you see something in her. And so look what it says in Luke 15. It says, or what woman, having 10 coins, loses one, does not diligently light a lamp, sweep the house, and seeks it until she finds it? She's got 9 more. Like, you've had 10. And what the Bible is saying here, she's sweeping her house all day trying to find this coin. You know how much you usually earned in a day? I read somewhere 1 to 3 coins a day. So what she could have done is said, you know what? I can count my loss. I'm going to go earn 3. But that coin, she went after. Why do you think she went after that coin? Well, it wasn't just the fact that it was metal. It was someone's image was on the coin, and that's what gives it value. There's things and moments in life, maybe it's a person because of what they've done and how they've been, or maybe it's you, that we, at times, if we're not careful, we can think of things as dismissible that God still sees as valuable. We don't give value. God does. And I am grateful for that. And so he says this, when she found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors. Did you catch that? She's calling friends and she's like, neighbors. Like, just, you're not even my friends. But I want you to come celebrate the fact that I found something. And can you imagine going to the mail and getting that? Hey, Margaret invited us to a party at her house. Oh, awesome. Whose birthday or what's going on? She found her coin. Her what? Yeah, we're supposed to go over to her house. And so she throws a party, and parties were big then, so she spends more than a coin on a coin. Do you see what he's trying to illustrate here? And that's why, to me, I see the power in Luke 15 with the prodigal son, and I see the power in Luke 15 with the lost sheep. But to me, this one's one of the most amazing because it's an illogical approach to value. And that's what Hosea and Gomer's all about. The things that we might say are not worth it and aren't going after are the very things that God is going after. And so notice what happens next. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and whatever that word is of barley. Now, here's what's interesting is one of my commentaries brought up that during this day, when he's standing there amongst all these men, and by the way, they are getting ready to buy her, to use her. But he's standing there to buy her, to redeem her. And the going rate at that time was 30 shekels. And here's why this is a big deal. The fact that the Bible mentions it's 15 is saying that Hosea literally is giving all he has. He's not just, he's at 15's all I have, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to find some barley and some silver and some other stuff to chip in because I don't have 30. It's a picture of what Jesus did for us, giving it all. Didn't just give some, he gave everything. He purchases us. But also look what it says in verse 3, and I said to her, so you must dwell as mine for many days, but you must not be a prostitute or belong to another man, and I'm going to do the exact same thing for you. He's saying, I'm wanting to free you from something. Remember that woman in John 8? One of the reasons why he said what he said, and the reason why Jesus did what he did in John 4 with a woman that had, 6 husbands, or 5, and the one she was living with wasn't her husband. He was trying to offer her, instead of running constantly to the outstretched arms of another man, I want to offer you something that is way better, living water. Because what you're after, those things that you think that you are missing, that you need to be happy, I give you those. But here's the thing that I want us to think about too, is the part of God's goodness that is so incredible about this whole thing is how we can learn from it too, that God can turn Gomers into Hoseas. I would love to know what stories are in this room of people that didn't grow up in the church, didn't grow up with a relationship with God, yet somewhere along the lines they came to know Jesus, and now they're doing the very thing that someone did for them. What I'm saying is the outstretched arms that you experienced, now you want other people to experience. When we were exiting in Birmingham a few years ago, we exited at a little area near Alabaster, and when we did, we pulled in a gas station. This man had a cardboard sign, and I don't know what the cardboard sign said, but I know he was asking for something. And when we go to the gas station, my son sees the man walking, our middle child, and he says, "Dad, are we going to help him?" And I got to be, I'm not saying what I was thinking was right. I'm just telling you what I was thinking. I was like, well, now I am. Okay. And so the man starts walking towards us, and I said, "Hey, sir, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash," which is true. I did not have cash. He said, "Oh, that's okay. I just really wanted something to eat." And so I said, "Well, you know what? After I get gas, what I'm going to do is there's a McDonald's, just right here." And it was one of those that you didn't have to leave the gas station. You could just pull right out and go right to it. I was like, "Hey, I'll go get you a cheeseburger. You want hamburger, cheeseburger?" He goes, "Actually, there's a Whataburger down the road. Could we get something from there?" I was like, "Well, you are a greedy hitchhiker." And that's what I was thinking. And I was like, "Okay." And then the kid in the back, middle child, he said, "Oh, yeah, I love Whataburger." And I'm like, now I know your reason to want to help the guy. And so anyway, so I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. Do you want a cheeseburger, hamburger? What would you like?" Y'all, he said a number 1. And then he said, "I wanted a large drink." I was like, "Okay." And so, with a smile, I drove across the street, pulled into that Whataburger, and went. And then my kids were like, "Well, I'm hungry." I was like, "Okay, of course." And so I was like, "Well, what do y'all want?" You know what was interesting? They're like, "Oh, I want a number 1, and I want a number 2. And I was like, "What do you want, honey? A number 3? You want a number 4? And I was like, "Okay, fine, that sounds good." And I was ordering all those things, and it hit me. I was like, wait. I was perfectly fine offering that to my family, but not that man. And the reason why I say that is I think sometimes, if we're not careful, that we can forget that we're supposed to be those Hoseas. The very things that we want and have experienced for ourselves, he wants us also to give to other people. And by the way, when you do that, they're not all the time going to turn. They're not always going to come back in the way you may want them to. They may not change, but here's what I can promise will happen. It'll change you. And so maybe you're in a state of indifference. What does it look like? I'll tell you one of the quickest ways to get out of it is confess and just literally say, "I'm in a place right now where I don't care. And I need God to help me care." Maybe for some of you is this, that you're isolated. You need a spiritual community. You were designed for it. You were made in it. You know when Jesus prayed as he was going into the garden, like he was getting ready to end his earthly ministry, the whole thing is praying for the church to be one and that they will have what he had. You think about this, insecurity. Maybe you've been wrapping up your identity in what you do, your relationships. Your spouse is great. Your job is great. Your job and your spouse make terrible gods. And so maybe for you, you've been wrapping your identity up in that. Maybe for some of you that you need a grateful spirit to look around at the things that you do have. Or maybe for some of you, it's an idol. You know what's really interesting is that in John 10, he describes himself as the door. And what's interesting about doors is just kind of like Baxter, doors are very scary. You know what's interesting about Baxter? When he learned what was out on the other side, guess what he didn't want to come back in. When he said he is the door, he's saying, listen, I know doors represent something new. It's a new opportunity, something else. But here's what's interesting. John 10, when it says he's the door, and then he says the shepherd, those two I am statements were not meant to be understood separately. They were meant to be understood together. That when we go out into through that door, through that sheep gate, guess what he is? He's the shepherd. So I want to end with this tonight. When Scott gave me the topic of Hosea and how God must feel, I used to coach a lot of basketball, and I said, when I have my own kids, I am not going to be that loud parent. I'm going to be the parent that just sits back. I'm going to be the coach's best friend. Well, you're about to watch a video that I took. And this is our first preseason game when Cruz had ever played baseball. And you can tell it's so new that we don't even have jerseys. We had new markers on the back, okay? And so I didn't know what was going to happen. I want you to watch this video and see if this sounds like a dad that doesn't care. All right? He's running aimlessly around the bases. I'm jumping down 3 bleachers. You know why? Because he's my son. You know? And if we serve a father that knows how to give good gifts like we do, like we serve one that can give even better gifts. And here's what I want to encourage you. Maybe you're here tonight and you think about those different lies that you've bought into in the valley. You think, well, why would God love somebody like me? Or how could God love somebody like me? Or how could he, bring this back in my life or give me the opportunity to start over? Here's what's really neat. You know what Hosea's name means? Salvation. Gomer's name means complete. And so if you're here tonight and you want to give your life back to Christ or to give it to Christ, I encourage you to do so. Maybe you need to be restored. Maybe you've been isolating yourself. Maybe you've been in a state of indifference. Maybe you've run like Gomer to something else.